Marcus Thompson was not your average CEO. Born and raised in a small working-class neighborhood on the south side of Chicago, he grew up watching his single mother juggle multiple jobs just to keep food on the table. From an early age, Marcus learned the value of hard work, determination, and resilience. He often helped his mom by taking odd jobs around the community, mowing lawns, delivering newspapers, and even washing cars. But what set Marcus apart wasn't just his willingness to put in the effort. It was his unshakable belief that he could achieve anything if he worked hard enough. In school, Marcus stood out as one of the brightest students in his class. His teachers quickly noticed his sharp mind and encouraged him to dream big. While other kids talked about becoming athletes or musicians, Marcus dreamed of building something that would change lives. By the time he graduated high school, he had earned a full scholarship to a prestigious university, where he studied business and entrepreneurship. It wasn't easy. There were moments when self-doubt crept in, especially since he was often the only black student in advanced classes. But Marcus pushed through, fueled by the memory of his mother's sacrifices. After college, Marcus didn't take the traditional route of climbing the corporate ladder. Instead, he started small, launching a tech company from his tiny apartment with nothing but a laptop and a bold idea. At first, no one believed in him. Investors turned him down repeatedly, telling him his vision was too ambitious or unrealistic. But Marcus refused to give up. He poured every ounce of energy into perfecting his product, a revolutionary app designed to streamline communication for businesses. Slowly but surely, people began to notice. Within 5 years, his company skyrocketed in value, earning him recognition as one of the youngest CEOs to ever lead a Fortune 500 company. Despite his meteoric rise, Marcus never forgot where he came from. He remained deeply connected to his roots, using his success to uplift others. He funded scholarships for underprivileged youth, mentored aspiring entrepreneurs, and spoke openly about the challenges he faced as a black man navigating predominantly white spaces. Yet despite all his accomplishments, Marcus still encountered subtle reminders that society viewed him differently. Whether it was being followed suspiciously in luxury stores or mistaken for service staff at upscale restaurants, these experiences stayed with him, shaping how he saw the world and how he navigated it. One thing Marcus prided himself on was his ability to stay calm under pressure. Over the years, he'd developed a reputation for handling difficult situations with grace and poise. But even someone as composed as Marcus had limits. Little did he know, a routine flight home would test not only his patience but also his resolve to demand respect in spaces where he often felt overlooked. What happened next would become a story that captivated millions, sparking conversations about race, power, and accountability in ways Marcus could never have anticipated. Marcus had just wrapped up a grueling week of meetings in Europe, finalizing a groundbreaking partnership that would solidify his company's dominance in the global market. Exhausted but triumphant, he boarded the flight back to New York, eager to return home and recharge. As a frequent traveler, Marcus knew the drill: first-class lounges, priority boarding, and the promise of a peaceful journey in the luxurious front section of the plane. For someone who spent most of his life grinding, these small comforts were a reminder of how far he'd come. The moment he stepped onto the aircraft, the familiar hum of the cabin greeted him. He nodded politely at the flight attendants as he made his way to his seat, a plush leather chair near the window. Settling in, Marcus exhaled deeply, finally allowing himself to relax. The first-class cabin was nearly full, with business executives, celebrities, and affluent travelers occupying the surrounding seats. Everyone seemed preoccupied, some scrolling through emails, others sipping champagne. But Marcus simply leaned back, closed his eyes, and let the soothing vibrations of the plane lull him into a brief moment of calm. About an hour into the flight, dinner service began. The aroma of gourmet meals wafted through the air, piquing Marcus's appetite. He watched as flight attendants moved gracefully down the aisle, presenting trays of food to each passenger with practiced precision. Plates of tender steak, steaming, vegetables, and decadent desserts were handed out one by one. Yet when the attendant reached Marcus's row, something strange happened. They skipped him entirely. At first, Marcus thought it might be a simple oversight. Perhaps they were saving his meal for last or needed to retrieve something special from the galley. But as the minutes ticked by and no one approached him, his patience began to wear thin. Glancing around, he noticed that every other passenger in first class had already been served, their meals neatly arranged on their tray tables. It was impossible to ignore the stark contrast between their satisfied expressions and his growing frustration. Finally, unable to stay silent any longer, Marcus pressed the call button above his seat. A different flight attendant arrived this time, her demeanor polite but distant. "Yes, sir. How can I assist you?" she asked, her voice clipped. Marcus gestured toward the empty space in front of him. "I haven't received my meal yet," he said calmly, though his tone carried a hint of irritation. The attendant hesitated for a fraction of a second before replying, "Oh, I'm so sorry, but we're actually out of meals in first class." Marcus blinked, unsure if he'd heard correctly. "Out of meals?" he repeated, his voice rising slightly. "How is that possible? Everyone else has been served." The attendant shifted uncomfortably, clearly unprepared for his question. "Well, there was a miscommunication with catering and unfortunately we ran short," she explained, avoiding eye contact. Her explanation felt hollow, especially given the opulence of the first-class cabin and the airline's reputation for excellence. Other passengers nearby couldn't help but overhear the exchange. Some glanced curiously at Marcus while others pretended not to notice, but the tension in the air was palpable. Marcus clenched his jaw, forcing himself to remain composed. He wasn't the type to make a scene, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was at play here. Was this really about a shortage of meals, or was it something else entirely? As the flight attendant walked away without offering further assistance, Marcus sat back in his seat, fuming silently. The rest of the flight stretched endlessly before him, each passing minute amplifying his anger. What should have been a relaxing journey home had turned into yet another reminder of the biases he faced, even in spaces where he paid top dollar to be treated equally. And Marcus knew this wasn't going to end quietly, not if he had anything to say about it. The rest of the flight felt like an eternity for Marcus. Every minute that passed only deepened his frustration and resentment. He replayed the incident over and over in his mind, dissecting every detail, the dismissive tone of the flight attendant, her refusal to meet his gaze, and the flimsy excuse about running out of meals. It wasn't just the lack of food that bothered him. It was the blatant disregard for his presence, as if he didn't belong in first class despite holding a ticket that cost more than most people made in a month. To distract himself, Marcus opened his laptop and tried to focus on work. But no matter how hard he concentrated, his thoughts kept drifting back to the exchange. He glanced around the cabin, observing the other passengers. Most were now engrossed in their meals or watching movies on their screens, seemingly oblivious to the tension simmering at Marcus's seat. A few, however, stole furtive glances in his direction, perhaps sensing that something was amiss. One older man seated across the aisle caught Marcus's eye and gave him a sympathetic nod before returning to his book. Despite his growing anger, Marcus reminded himself where he was, 35,000 feet in the air, surrounded by strangers who had nothing to do with what had happened. Losing his temper mid-flight wouldn't solve anything and might even make him look unreasonable. So, he took a deep breath, closed his laptop, and leaned back into his seat. For the next hour, he focused on calming himself, repeating a mantra he often used during stressful moments. "Stay composed. You're stronger than this." As the plane began its descent toward New York, Marcus decided it was time to act. Once the seatbelt sign illuminated and the crew started preparing for landing, he pressed the call button again. This time, the same flight attendant who had denied him a meal appeared, though she looked noticeably uneasy. "Yes, sir?" she asked, her voice tinged with apprehension. Marcus fixed her with a steady gaze. "I'd like to speak with the lead flight attendant," he said firmly but politely. The woman hesitated, clearly caught off guard by his request. After a brief pause, she nodded and scurried away, leaving Marcus alone once more. Moments later, a tall man in a crisp uniform approached. Introducing himself as the lead flight attendant, he offered a curt apology for any inconvenience Marcus may have experienced. But Marcus wasn't satisfied with empty words. "I appreciate you coming over," he began, his tone measured yet firm. "But I need to understand why I was skipped entirely during dinner service. Everyone else in first class received their meals, yet I was told there weren't any left. Does that sound fair to you?" The lead flight attendant shifted uncomfortably, clearly unprepared for such a direct confrontation. "Sir, I assure you it was an honest mistake," he stammered. "We'll be sure to address this issue so it doesn't happen again." Marcus studied the man's face, searching for sincerity. What he saw instead was evasion, a clear indication that they weren't taking his concerns seriously. Realizing he wouldn't get anywhere while still airborne, Marcus decided to bide his time. "Thank you for your response," he said coolly. "However, I'll need to take further action once we land." With that, the lead flight attendant nodded stiffly and retreated, leaving Marcus to stew in silence. As the plane touched down and taxied to the gate, Marcus felt a mix of emotions: anger, disappointment, and determination. He knew exactly what he needed to do next. This wasn't just about a missed meal anymore. It was about standing up against systemic biases that persisted even in spaces designed for privilege and exclusivity. When the doors finally opened and passengers began disembarking, Marcus lingered in his seat, letting everyone else file off ahead of him. He wanted to ensure he had the undivided attention of the crew before making his move. With each passing second, his resolve hardened. By the time he stepped onto the jet bridge, Marcus had already formulated a plan, one that would send shockwaves through the airline industry and beyond. As Marcus stepped off the plane, his polished leather shoes clicked against the metal surface of the jet bridge. The hum of passengers chatting and rolling suitcases faded into the background as he paused just outside the aircraft door. He wasn't in a rush to leave, not yet. Instead, he turned back toward the flight crew, who were busy tidying up the cabin and preparing for their next assignment. His calm demeanor masked the storm brewing inside him. "Excuse me," Marcus called out, his voice steady but commanding enough to grab the attention of the lead flight attendant and two other crew members lingering near the exit. They looked up, startled by his unexpected presence. The lead flight attendant, the same man who had offered that hollow apology mid-flight, approached cautiously, clearly unsure of what Marcus intended to say. "I wanted to speak with you before heading out," Marcus began, his tone measured but firm. "About the incident earlier regarding my meal." He let the words hang in the air, watching as the color drained from the attendant's face. Clearly, they hadn't anticipated Marcus pursuing the matter further after landing. The lead flight assistant stammered, trying to backtrack. "Sir, as I mentioned earlier, it was an unfortunate oversight. We'll make sure this doesn't happen again." Marcus raised a hand, cutting him off mid-sentence. "Let me stop you right there," he said, his voice cool but laced with authority. "This wasn't just an oversight. It was disrespectful. And frankly, your response during the flight didn't inspire much confidence either." The crew exchanged uneasy glances, sensing that Marcus wasn't about to let this slide. One of the attendants shifted nervously, clutching a stack of blankets, tighter to her chest. Another avoided eye contact altogether, staring at the floor as if hoping to disappear. Marcus continued, his words deliberate and precise. "I travel frequently, and I've learned to pick up on patterns of behavior that suggest bias. What happened today wasn't an isolated mistake. It was part of a larger issue within your airline, one that needs addressing immediately." This point, the lead flight attendant tried to interject again. "We value all our passengers equally, sir. If there was any misunderstanding..." But Marcus wasn't interested in platitudes. "Save it," he interrupted, his tone sharper. "Now, here's what's going to happen. You can expect a formal complaint from me, and trust me, it won't end there. I own a significant stake in this airline through my company's recent acquisition. Consider this a heads up. I'll be speaking directly with your executives about accountability measures for everyone involved in this fiasco." The weight of his words hit like a thunderclap. The crew froze, their expressions shifting from confusion to panic. None of them had expected this level of escalation. To them, Marcus had been just another passenger, an inconvenience easily brushed aside. Now they realized they were dealing with someone who not only had power but also knew how to wield it effectively. With that, Marcus adjusted his tie, grabbed his carry-on bag, and walked briskly down the jet bridge. Each step echoed with purpose, leaving behind stunned silence. As he entered the terminal, his mind raced with plans. He pulled out his phone and dialed his assistant, dictating instructions for setting up an urgent meeting with the airline's top executives. "Get me their CEO on the line ASAP," he instructed, "and prepare documentation of today's events. I want video footage, witness statements, everything we can gather." By the time Marcus reached the baggage claim area, he had already outlined his strategy. This wasn't just about firing a few negligent employees. It was about sending a message. Airlines prided themselves on delivering luxury experiences in first class, yet here they were failing even the most basic standards of respect. Marcus knew firsthand how systemic racism operated. It cloaked itself in subtleties, hiding behind excuses like miscommunication or oversight, but he refused to let it slide under his watch. As he waited for his luggage, Marcus glanced around at the bustling airport. Travelers rushed past, oblivious to the drama unfolding behind closed doors. For most people, flying was simply a means to an end. But for Marcus, this moment represented something bigger, a chance to challenge the status quo and demand better. By the time his bag arrived on the carousel, his decision was final. No one would be spared. The entire crew responsible for today's mess would face consequences, not out of spite, but because true leadership required holding people accountable when they failed to uphold values of fairness and respect. Little did the airline know, Marcus's actions would spark a chain reaction that would ripple far beyond their boardroom. Within hours of landing, Marcus was sitting in a sleek conference room at his company's headquarters, surrounded by executives from the airline. The atmosphere was tense, with stacks of documents and laptops scattered across the table. Marcus had wasted no time escalating the issue, leveraging both his position as a major shareholder and his reputation as a no-nonsense leader to demand immediate action. He didn't mince words when addressing the group. "This isn't just about me," Marcus began, his voice steady but firm. "It's about what happened on that flight and why it keeps happening not just here but across industries. Bias doesn't exist in a vacuum. It thrives when systems fail to hold people accountable." He leaned forward slightly, locking eyes with each executive around the table. "I'm giving you two options. Either we address this head-on, or I'll sell my stake in your company and make sure everyone knows why." The room fell silent. No one dared to interrupt. These were seasoned professionals, accustomed to high-stakes negotiations, but none of them had ever faced someone like Marcus, a man who combined raw determination with undeniable power. His calm demeanor masked a steely resolve that left little room for argument. To drive his point home, Marcus presented evidence he'd gathered since disembarking the plane. Video footage from security cameras inside the aircraft showed the flight attendants bypassing him during meal service while serving other passengers without hesitation. Witness statements from first-class travelers corroborated his account, describing how visibly uncomfortable they felt watching the exchange unfold. One passenger even admitted to overhearing the lead flight attendant mutter something dismissive under their breath after Marcus pressed the call button. "You see," Marcus continued, gesturing toward the screen displaying the footage. "This isn't speculation. This is proof. And if this kind of behavior can happen to someone like me, a Fortune 500 CEO traveling in first class, imagine what others go through every single day." The airline's CEO, a middle-aged man named Richard Hayes, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Mr. Thompson, I assure you we take these allegations very seriously," he said, attempting to sound conciliatory. "We will launch an internal investigation immediately." Marcus raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "An investigation? That's not enough. Investigations take time, and meanwhile, nothing changes. What I want is accountability. Right now," he then outlined his demands. "Immediate termination of the entire crew involved in the incident, mandatory diversity training for all employees, and the creation of a task force dedicated to addressing systemic biases within the airline." When one of the executives hesitated, pointing out that firing the entire crew might seem excessive, Marcus cut them off. "Excessive?" he repeated, his tone sharp. Let me remind you, this crew neglected their duty to serve all passengers equally. They ignored protocol, dismissed complaints, and refused to acknowledge wrongdoing even after being confronted. If that's not grounds for termination, then tell me, what is? No one answered. The gravity of Marcus's position sank in. As a major shareholder, he held significant influence over the airline's future. Selling his stake would not only cause financial losses but also tarnish the brand's reputation irreparably. For a business built on customer satisfaction, such fallout could be catastrophic. By the end of the meeting, the executives reluctantly agreed to comply with Marcus's terms. Within 48 hours, the entire crew was officially terminated, and plans were set in motion to implement sweeping reforms across the organization. While some members of the team grumbled privately about the severity of the punishment, no one dared challenge Marcus openly. After all, his actions sent a clear message. Accountability wasn't optional, it was non-negotiable. As Marcus left the building later that evening, he felt a mix of emotions. Satisfaction coursed through him knowing that justice had been served, but it was tempered by frustration. This shouldn't have required so much effort. Why did marginalized individuals always have to fight twice as hard to receive basic respect? Still, Marcus knew this victory was more than personal. It was symbolic. By standing up, he had ignited a conversation that couldn't be ignored. And sometimes, that was the first step toward real change. News of Marcus Thompson's bold decision spread like wildfire. Within hours, social media platforms were ablaze with reactions to the story. Journalists scrambled to piece together details, while influencers and commentators weighed in on every angle. The hashtag, Justice for Marcus, trended worldwide, sparking heated debates about privilege, power, and systemic racism. For many, Marcus's actions represented a long overdue reckoning, a moment where someone finally held an institution accountable for discriminatory behavior. At first, public opinion seemed split. On one side, Marcus had his supporters, people who admired his courage and applauded him for standing up against injustice. If anyone deserves respect, it's Marcus Thompson, tweeted a prominent civil rights advocate. This isn't just about a missed meal. It's about dismantling the biases that keep people down. Others shared personal stories of similar experiences, flooding comment sections with tales of being overlooked or mistreated because of their race, gender, or socioeconomic status. These voices coalesced into a chorus demanding change, using Marcus's story as a rallying cry, but not everyone agreed. Critics argued that firing the entire crew was excessive, accusing Marcus of abusing his power. Sure, what happened wasn't right, but did he really have to ruin lives over a meal? Wrote one columnist. Another commentator suggested that Marcus's wealth and influence gave him an unfair advantage, claiming that most people wouldn't dare challenge authority so boldly. Some even accused him of grandstanding, saying he'd use the incident as an opportunity to boost his image. Despite the backlash, Marcus remained unfazed. He knew controversy came with the territory when challenging entrenched systems. Rather than engaging directly with his critics, he focused on amplifying the broader conversation. In interviews and op-eds, he spoke candidly about the cumulative impact of microaggressions, the subtle, often unintentional acts of discrimination that wear people down over time. Imagine walking into a room knowing you'll be judged before you even open your mouth, he said during a live TV appearance. That's my reality, and the reality for millions of others. It's exhausting, and it has to stop. His words resonated deeply, especially among marginalized communities. Many saw Marcus not just as a victim of bias, but as a symbol of resilience. Parents shared his interview clips with their children, teaching them the importance of speaking up against injustice. Young professionals looked to him as a role model, inspired by his refusal to accept anything less than equality. Even some skeptics began to reconsider their stance, acknowledging that Marcus's actions highlighted issues far bigger than one flight crew. Meanwhile, the airline faced mounting pressure from both customers and advocacy groups. Passengers canceled flights, citing the incident as evidence of poor service and lack of inclusivity. Social media campaigns urged travelers to boycott the carrier until meaningful reforms were implemented. Faced with plummeting sales and negative publicity, the airline doubled down on its commitment to change. Executives announced plans to overhaul their training programs, introducing workshops on unconscious bias and cultural sensitivity. They also pledged to diversify their leadership team, ensuring that decision-makers reflected the diversity of their passengers. Marcus seized the momentum, partnering with organizations dedicated to combating discrimination in the travel industry. Together, they launched initiatives aimed at increasing representation among airline staff, from ground crews to pilots, and creating safe spaces for employees to report incidents without fear of retaliation. He also spearheaded a mentorship program connecting young people from underrepresented backgrounds with leaders in aviation, offering scholarships and internships to help bridge the gap. As weeks turned into months, the narrative shifted. What started as outrage over a single incident evolved into a movement, one that forced industries to confront uncomfortable truths about inequality. Marcus's name became synonymous with accountability, inspiring others to demand better treatment in all areas of life. And though the road ahead remained long, Marcus knew he had planted a seed. Change wouldn't happen overnight, but it had begun, and that was enough to keep him hopeful. In the months following the incident, Marcus didn't stop at holding the airline accountable. He made it his mission to ensure that real, lasting change took root. He knew firing the crew and issuing public apologies were only surface-level fixes. True transformation required digging deeper, addressing the systemic issues that allowed biases to fester in the first place. For Marcus, this wasn't just about one airline. It was about setting a standard for how companies should treat their customers and employees. One of his first steps was introducing a comprehensive diversity and inclusion initiative within the airline. This wasn't your typical corporate checkbox exercise. Marcus insisted on creating programs with measurable outcomes. He brought in experts from civil rights organizations and academia to design training modules that went beyond vague concepts, like respect and tolerance. Instead, these workshops focused on identifying unconscious bias, understanding cultural differences, and fostering empathy among staff. Employees weren't just told what not to do. They were taught why. Fairness mattered and how small actions could have big impacts. To hold everyone accountable, Marcus implemented a transparent reporting system. Passengers could now submit feedback anonymously through an app, rating their interactions with flight attendants, gate agents, and other personnel. Any pattern of discriminatory behavior would trigger an automatic investigation, bypassing layers of bureaucracy that often buried complaints in the past. The message was clear. No one was above scrutiny, not even senior management. But Marcus didn't stop there. Recognizing that meaningful change started at the top, he pushed the airline's board to diversify its leadership team. Within 6 months, several high-profile appointments were made, including a black woman as chief operating officer, the first in the company's history. These new leaders brought fresh perspectives and a commitment to equity, reshaping policies across departments. Under their guidance, hiring practices were reevaluated to eliminate barriers for underrepresented groups, while promotions became more merit-based and inclusive. Outside the airline, Marcus expanded his efforts to tackle broader industry-wide challenges. Partnering with advocacy groups, he launched a coalition called Skyward Equity, aimed at increasing representation in aviation. From ground crews to pilots, the initiative provided scholarships, mentorship programs, and career pipelines for individuals from marginalized communities. Marcus personally funded the project, investing millions into grants designed to break down financial barriers that kept talented people out of the field. He also used his platform to educate others, speaking at conferences and writing op-eds about the importance of representation. When you see someone who looks like you in positions of power, it changes what you believe is possible, he wrote in one widely shared article. That's why we need more black pilots, female engineers, and LGBTQ+ executives in aviation. It's not just about fairness, it's about inspiration. As these initiatives gained traction, the airline began to notice tangible improvements. Customer satisfaction ratings soared, particularly among minority travelers who reported feeling more respected and valued. Employee morale improved too, with many workers expressing pride in being part of an organization actively working toward equality. Social media buzzed with positive stories, passengers praising flight attendants for going above and beyond, or sharing moments when they felt genuinely seen and heard. Yet Marcus understood that progress wasn't linear. There were still bumps along the way, missteps, pushback, and lingering resistance from those uncomfortable with change. But instead of viewing setbacks as failures, he saw them as opportunities to learn and grow. Each challenge reinforced his belief that true leadership meant staying committed, even when the path got rocky. By the end of the year, the airline had become a case study in corporate accountability. Other companies began reaching out to Marcus asking for advice on implementing similar reforms. What started as a single act of defiance had snowballed into a movement, one that proved that standing up against injustice wasn't just the right thing to do, it was good business. And for Marcus, that was the ultimate victory, proving that fairness and success weren't mutually exclusive. They went hand in hand. Months turned into a year, and the ripple effects of Marcus Thompson's actions continued to spread far beyond the confines of that single flight. The airline, once embroiled in controversy, had transformed itself into a beacon of progress within the travel industry. Passengers began to notice subtle but significant changes. Flight attendants greeted everyone with genuine warmth regardless of race or class. Complaints about discriminatory behavior plummeted, and diverse faces became more visible both on the ground and in leadership roles. For many travelers, flying with this carrier no longer felt like rolling the dice. It felt safe, respectful, and inclusive. Marcus's influence extended well beyond the airline. His bold decision to hold the crew accountable sparked conversations across industries about systemic bias and corporate responsibility. Other companies took note, realizing they couldn't afford to ignore similar issues lurking beneath the surface. Executives reached out to Marcus for guidance, eager to learn how he'd managed to turn a PR nightmare into an opportunity for growth. In response, Marcus founded a consulting firm dedicated to helping organizations navigate diversity challenges. Through workshops, audits, and long-term partnerships, his team worked tirelessly to dismantle barriers and foster cultures of inclusion. But perhaps the most profound impact was felt by ordinary people, inspired by Marcus's courage. Countless individuals shared stories of how his actions gave them the confidence to speak up when faced with injustice. A young woman recounted how she confronted her boss after being passed over for a promotion because of her gender. A college student described standing up to a professor who consistently mispronounced his name, despite repeated corrections. Even strangers stopped Marcus on the street to thank him, not just for what he'd done, but for reminding them that their voices mattered. Despite his newfound fame, Marcus remained grounded. He often reflected on his journey, acknowledging that none of this would have been possible without the lessons he'd learned growing up in Chicago. Those early struggles had taught him resilience, humility, and the importance of using his success to uplift others. "I didn't do this for recognition," he told an interviewer during a rare candid moment. "I did it because I knew I could, and because if I didn't, who would?" As time went on, Marcus's legacy grew. Awards rolled in, celebrating his contributions to social justice and business innovation. Yet he never let accolades define him. Instead, he poured his energy into mentoring the next generation of leaders, people who dreamed of breaking barriers and creating equitable spaces. He funded scholarships, hosted networking events, and even launched a podcast where he interviewed trailblazers from all walks of life, sharing their stories with millions of listeners. Looking back, Marcus saw the incident not as a low point, but as a turning point, a moment that forced him to confront uncomfortable truths and channel his frustration into action. It reminded him that change rarely came without sacrifice, but it also showed him the power of leading by example. By refusing to accept anything less than respect, he had ignited a movement that touched lives around the world. Today, Marcus is remembered not just as a successful CEO, but as someone who dared to challenge the status quo. His story serves as a testament to the idea that true leadership isn't about titles or wealth. It's about leaving the world better than you found it. And while the road ahead remains imperfect, Marcus knows that every step forward counts. After all, revolutions don't happen overnight, but they always start with one brave person willing to take a stand.